Welcome to Hope Talk Podcast, Conversations for Special Needs Families. This is a space where we talk about the challenges that families face, and we provide information and resources that give you hope, not only for today, but also for the future. I'm your host, Julie Cadman, co-founder of Healing Complex Kids and co-author of the Pathway to Hope Resource Guide for Special Needs. Today, we're going to be talking about the need for advocacy and self-advocacy. I am joined by Angela Tyszka. Angela is an expert when it comes to educational advocacy. She helps families to get information and resources they need so their children can have the best support and services they need for their success. Welcome, Angela. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So let's go right to basics before we get started. Why do you believe it's important for parents to advocate for their child?
Well, bottom line, you're the expert on your child. So if you're not advocating for them, no one will. And the reality of the situation is that there's only a finite amount of resources in public education. And so if no one's advocating for your child specifically, then it's easier for the school to allocate those resources to somebody else.
So Angela, many parents want to be better advocates for their child, but they don't know where to start. Are there some practical steps you can share with us to get them started?
Well, I would say the number one thing you want to make sure that you do is you prepare and you participate. So in order to do that, you need to read IEP reports, you need to look over your child's evaluations, you need to really understand what their disability is and how it affects them in the classroom so that you can determine what their needs are.
So Angela, a lot of parents, they feel unsure of where to start, especially if they think, hey, maybe my child needs an IEP. How would you recommend they go forward, and are there resources that can help them?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The best piece of advice I received when my child was born and had some disabilities was to identify my state's Parent and Training Information Center. So every state has one. Here in Michigan, ours is called Michigan Alliance for Families. And they provide resources to parents in easy to understand forms. They have videos, they have trainings, they have handouts that you can read through. So that would be the first place I would start. And then I would encourage you to look for more resources to help you understand special education law. Like there's a really popular resource that's called Rights Law. And it's run by an attorney, Pete Wright, and his wife, Pam Wright. And they put together lots of training sessions. They have a fantastic book. And I would say, and I'm not receiving anything from this, however, I would say that you really need to know how to control your emotions, because IEP meetings are very emotional. They're very overwhelming. And when you're talking about your child, you need to learn how to control those things.
Grab your copy of Pathway to Hope Resource Guide for Special Needs on Amazon. It's a roadmap filled with strategies, tools, and encouragement to help your family thrive. So what do you tell parents that are really nervous? How do you prepare them to confidently walk into the room for an IEP meeting?
Well, there's a couple of things I would do. First of all, I would read that book called From Emotions to Advocacy, because it writes it out step by step, the things that you need to do and the things that you need to know. And then I would say that, again, you prepare and you participate. You write a concerns or input letter ahead of time.
Tell me about that. What is the concerns or input letter?
Well, I would go through every particular area. So you can go through academic subjects. If your child's struggling in reading, perhaps, that may be an area that you have concern. Or if they're struggling socially or emotionally, or maybe they're having some behavioral issues, those can be concerns. You can also include your input. What am I seeing at home? What are we seeing at their ABA center, for example? I would also recommend that You ask for a draft copy of the IEP and any evaluation reports that were done, and ask for those to be given to you ahead of the meeting. Now, schools aren't legally obligated to provide those in all states. However, we do have the right to meaningful participation in our child's IEP. And I would argue that it's difficult to meaningfully participate if you don't have all the information.
Well, you and I have talked about this. We've been in meetings where, as parents, where you don't get the draft in advance and you don't want to cancel because you're not going to get a meeting for maybe another few weeks. So you have to sit down and they're showing line by line and it's the first time you've seen it. So how can you meaningfully participate? I don't think you can. I think you're right.
Yeah, it's difficult. I would also encourage you to bring somebody to the meeting with you, whether that person is your spouse or a family friend, or it may even need to be an advocate that can come and talk on your behalf. That person can take notes. They can help, you come back to the information later. So
they can be that neutral source too.
Yes.
Because it is very emotional and sometimes you need somebody that is more neutral to maybe pull the conversation back. When we talk about preparing, what do you recommend parents do to help their children to be part of that process? Or at what point is it appropriate to include them?
Well, obviously, it's going to depend on where that child is developmentally. But some very basic things that you can do is you can ask your child, when you're writing your concerns and input letter, ask your child for their input. What are some things that the school is doing that helps you? And what are some things that they're not doing that you think would help you? And include their input in your letter. And if the child's, maybe a little older or a little more developmentally appropriate, you could invite them to some part of the meeting to advocate on their own behalf.
Well, and you can also just make sure that they understand what's going on, because those are like the first steps. Okay, we're having a meeting to get you what you need so you can be successful and you can feel good about it.
Sure, that's a very good point. Yes.
Because we talked a lot about the why. So when we get into the self-advocacy, they need to understand the why. And if we never bring them or tell them what's going on, they're never going to understand.
Correct. And I think it's important to think about where would an appropriate place be to bring them in? When you think about those early IEP meetings where you're talking a lot about your child's strengths and their weaknesses, I always encourage parents to maybe have their child come in for the first 10 minutes and hear what the strengths are and give their own input if they're able to at that point. And then maybe they leave and go back to class so that they're not hearing all of the weaknesses per se that we talk about in these meetings.
Because that can be overwhelming.
It can be overwhelming. It can be self-defeating. So, and then, I've had children that say, I just can't go into a room and talk to, 5 teachers about what my troubles are, but they'll make a video that they can send, or maybe they'll write it down. They'll write a paper that the parent could read in the meeting.
Grab your copy of Pathway to Hope Resource Guide for Special Needs on Amazon. It's a roadmap filled with strategies, tools, and encouragement to help your family thrive. So I know there are instances, we've had conversations about this, where for whatever reason, parents can't get what they're requesting. It's denied, or they can't get the IEP fulfilled. What are their recourse, and how do you help them in those instances?
Well, first I would say, ask yourself, is this the hill I want to die on? Because not every ask, every request is something that needs to be done right now, right? We can always revisit requests. We can always come back around. Maybe we don't have enough data. If what we're asking for is a one-to-one paraprofessional, maybe we don't have enough data right now to support that child needing that, but maybe we will in the future.
One of the things we talked about too is with the one-on-one, like Sometimes they need it, sometimes they don't. A lot of parents come in with the thought, I need it right now, but they may only need it for transitioning to another classroom, to the lunchroom, to gym.
Yes. So I talk a lot with my parents about ideal outcomes. That's what you want. I mean, when you're advocating and in life and in business and in any instance, you need to know, what do I want? What am I asking for? And we talk about ideal outcomes, right? That's ideally what we want. We want a one-to-one parapro for our child. But what are some acceptable alternatives that we may look at? And like you mentioned, we could look at those points in the day where the child is really struggling. So maybe when they're sitting in the classroom and they have the teacher in front of them, or the teacher coming over and sitting with them, they don't need a one-to-one paraprofessional. But when they're transitioning to recess, or they're going to the lunchroom, they're going to a particular academic class, they may need more support. So maybe we put into their IEP that they get more adult support in those times of need, and not a blanket one-to-one parapro for the entire day.
What about those instances, though, where a family has a robust IEP, there's a lot in there, but it's not being followed? What can happen in those instances?
Well, that's a good question. I would say to parents that just know that nothing is written in stone, right? We can always circle back and call another IEP meeting. I've had a lot of parents that have said, I didn't know I could have more than one IEP meeting in a year.
I think that's a really good point.
It is a really good point. So a lot of parents don't know that. A lot of parents don't know that their input is very important and that they're the expert. And I would say that a parent that's done their research would know that there's procedural safeguards for every state. And I understand, they hand you this booklet. Here in our state, it's 63 pages. And it's written in very legalese terms, right? So it's very difficult to understand. But know that you have rights. And if you need somebody to help explain what those rights are, reach out to your parent training and information center. Reach out to an advocate. Reach out to somebody that can help you understand that, and utilize those if you need to. File a state complaint. You can do that without an attorney or an advocate or anybody. Go to mediation. Mediation services are free through the states. File a due process if you need to go to court and have these things adjudicated.
So a lot of great steps. Hopefully we don't get to that point,
right?
But document it. I think that is probably one of the biggest things. Document what's happening, because if it's not written down, I was told by one of our advocates early on, if it's not written down, it didn't happen.
I say that everything in writing or it didn't happen.
So let's talk about, when is the right time to start teaching self-advocacy for kids? And are there smaller moments that lead, I guess, to the bigger things, like how they advocate not only educationally, but medically? Because a lot of our kids have medical issues.
Well, I think it's important to understand what is self-advocacy as well. So self-advocacy, in very plain terms for your kids, is just asking for what you need. And so when we're talking about how do we teach these things to kids, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, it's really dependent on where your child is developmentally. Like I have an older son that's nonverbal. And so for him, advocacy, self-advocacy looks like asking for a break on his AAC device, right? And we can teach that at a very young age. I have another child that may be just asking for the ability to use his accommodation. If he's taking a test, he has the ability to go out in the hall. So teaching your children what they need and how to ask for them and how to get them is the whole point of self-advocacy.
And how to do it respectfully.
Absolutely.
I know of a young lady who was not having her accommodations met in high school. And instead of talking with her parents and working it through, she basically accosted the teacher in the hall and started screaming, and it became a whole full-blown, okay, how do we fix this? But yeah, that's why I think respectfully. Grab your copy of Pathway to Hope Resource Guide for Special Needs on Amazon. It's a roadmap filled with strategies, tools, and encouragement to help your family thrive. What are some practical ways in real life that you can help your children develop self-advocacy?
Well, you can model how you would advocate for yourself. Kids are always listening to us as parents, and they're listening to the ways that we do things. So that's a good way. You could explain the why, as we mentioned before, and explain it in terms that are familiar to them. And you can also role play with your kids and work on certain scenarios. Maybe you write out a script and you give them questions to ask. You can think about different places where you could practice these things. So if you go out to dinner with your family, you could have your child order their own food, ask for their own refills. We talk about going to medical settings. We could give them some questions to ask their doctor, like, what do these test results mean? Or how could I be healthier? Also just giving them the opportunities to be more independent. So, I travel a lot with my family, and, my son forgot his toothbrush. So I said, well, they have toothbrushes at the front desk, but you need to go down and ask for it. And that was a little difficult for him because sometimes he has trouble talking to adults, but that's building that skill, giving him words that he could use to ask for things and then allowing him to do it.
So I love what you had to say about scripts. With AI being so prevalent, we've started using it for our college age kids and basically saying, okay, we used to write the scripts out, we'd put it online, we'd model, we'd practice all that. Well, now I've got a daughter who's actually using it to script as she's going forward in the business world. Super helpful.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, super, super helpful. So finally, can you share some real world examples of how a child's advocacy changed how a teacher in the educational setting or a doctor in the medical setting thought about them?
Wow, I have many, many examples of this, but one that jumps out in my mind is I was in an IEP meeting with a family, and the child was not present at this meeting. So we were talking about this child. The child was having some behavioral issues and some difficulty with a particular teacher. Their relationship wasn't exactly professional. And so the child was refusing to come to school. And it took us leaving that meeting and bringing the daughter down to talk to just a small group of people about what she was feeling and how this relationship with this teacher was affecting her ability to come to school. And you could just see the light bulb go off in the special ed director's head that, wow, I didn't realize that this is how this child was feeling. And we got a call the next day. They had changed the child's schedule. They had given her a new caseworker. So it really just took hearing the child's perspective. And I think that's so important because I've never met a teacher that went into education for anything but wanting to help children. And sometimes we forget that when we're in these meetings because, we're fighting for these finite resources, right? And so, but they didn't go into it for the pay or the summers off. They go into it to help children. So sometimes just reminding them of that by showing them that child.
I'll give you a medical one as well. We have a child who is very medically compromised and went through a lot of time in the hospital for many years. And I remember the child talking to the doctor about what it felt like to be him and to go through this. And I remember our neurologist looking him in the eye and saying, you have gone through more in your young life than most people will their whole life. And it just, you saw him stand up taller because he was being valued what he had to say. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that in IEP meetings where you bring the child in or they have a video and suddenly they're talking. And I've been in meetings where I've seen teachers start to cry because they didn't realize what was really happening.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for coming today and sharing so much of your wisdom.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate it. For parents listening, I hope you take away not just the information, but also the encouragement that you are not alone in this. To take the next step, grab your copy of Pathway to Hope Resource Guide for Special Needs on Amazon. It's a roadmap filled with strategies, tools, and encouragement to help your family thrive. And for a personalized roadmap, check out the Hope Recovery Map on our Healing Complex Kids resource page. It guides families step by step with tailored tools and resources. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, where we share more tips, stories, and updates to support you every step of the way. If you found today's episode helpful, please share it with another family who could use some hope. Together, we can make sure no family feels alone in teaching this important information. Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, progress may be slow, but every step forward matters. And no matter where you are in the journey, there is help, there is support, and there is hope.